SJ. Welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ, Stongo, Gary Fife, Joe Jeff Gados, Mvskoke Radio, Mabu Hedget Wickets. Welcome to our program here, hard on 1240 The Brew in beautiful downtown and kind of hot and steamy Okmulgee here today. So take care of yourselves if you're going to be outside today. Geez, it's really summertime here in Oklahoma. I got a couple of things we'll be sharing with you today. First will be an interview we did with George Alexander II. He was a recent graduate of the famed Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We have a talk with him about his background and some of his thoughts on American Indian art these days and kind of the things that he's working on. He was a candidate to do another mural here in downtown Okmulgee, but I guess they chose someone else. In the second part of our program, our media coordinator, Jessica McBride, joining us. She is going to be going over the recently released audit from the U.S. Department of Housing and Development. It's not real good looking at some of the past practices that have been revealed in that examination there of the housing program here for the tribe. But well, you gotta deal with some of the good and the bad and sometimes the ugly. She'll be joining us in the second half of our program. But first of all, here's my talk with George Alexander II, the graduate of the IAIA Art School in Santa Fe. You began as a child kind of doing your own versions of cartoon art, and it sounds like that was a process of discovery.
Yeah. Whenever my favorite cartoon show came on, it would come on a TV show, our TV line called Toonami, and Toonami would post up their favorite depictions of fan drawings, and to me at that time that was completely amazing. Like, 7 years old, seeing something that you did on TV is kind of like some big time stuff.
Now, did you submit and was it on the air, some of the stuff you did?
The funniest thing was it was really intimidating. I never submitted anything because I never thought that it was good enough.
It sounds like, though, through the support of your family and your enrollment at the Institute in Santa Fe, that changed your mind. And again, another process of discovery as you were exposed to this incredible heritage we have of artists and things like that.
Yeah, if it wasn't for my family or then I definitely wouldn't be as successful as I am today. When I first got to IAI, my entire idea of what art was is completely different than what I think art should be today. When I first got there, I didn't know exactly what it was that I wanted to do. I knew that at this point in time that I was interested into tattooing. Like, that was the only thing that I kind of had in my mind that I could kind of have this directional route to go. But as I matured and got into other mediums of art, I really fell in love with painting.
Now, as you gained this exposure and begin to discover this fabulous world out there of talent and ability that a lot of our kinfolk have, what direction did you want to go when you saw that? The reason I ask is, the evolution of Native American art has been from the representational kind of thing, the spirit horse and the buffalo hunt, which we've all seen. And then in later years, that school was responsible for the development of more abstract versions, you know, the Fritz shoulders and,
Yeah.
TC cannons and those kinds of things. So when you saw all of this, what went through your mind and told you which way you wanted to go?
Well, that one's actually kind of easy question. When you first get to IAI, that's the first thing you learn about is the contemporary side of Native art, because typically whenever you look at Native art, you're right. The first thing that kind of goes through your mind is traditional arts, you know, textiles, ledger book drawings, or beading, or any other traditional art form. And to some people, that's the extent of their Native art knowledge. And then whenever I first saw a Fritz shoulder, that was completely different. That was absolutely amazing, because I've never seen anything quite astonishing as Fritz or TC or Allen Hauser, or any other, the Kiowa Five, you know, all these big time artists. And like these guys, whenever they were alive, they were hanging out with like Andy Warhol and like, you know, other crazy artists that were doing big things in New York. But it doesn't get mentioned a lot. And nowadays, you know, it's, I don't know. I'm finding this to be a bit of a struggle, you know, because some people, they have these ideas of what you should paint as a Native artist. But I don't paint the normal Indian headdress or even traditional designs. My work just depicts astronauts and satellites and things that I'm interested in. I'm really trying to not necessarily separate myself from my Native heritage, because that will never happen, but separate myself from being a Native artist to just an artist who happens to be Native. And I'm not the only artist that's doing this, you know, like, if you look at more contemporary artists these days, it's in that realm of being just art. And I think that's the direction that Native art should go, because it opens up the door to other people who may not know where we come from. It gives them a way in without being disrespectful, like what Urban Outfitters did to the Navajo Nation.
Now, all of that's understandable. There is no sensible reason why a Native American person who is an artist be confined by saying, well, what you do is not Indian art because I don't see any dancers or horses or, you know, wolves or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you are a Native American person living in today's world, 2016, and contemporary. You can go the directions that you choose then, right?
Yeah. I don't have any intention of just painting Indians in the headdresses or any of the sort. Now, because the ironic thing is that I happen to be Native, and I grew up inside of a Native community. So, of course, these images are going to pop up in my artwork in some way or another. The background of my message in my work, my statement, is humanity and everybody being indigenous to this earth. I don't know too much about our creation story. I'd really like to learn a little bit more, but from what I know that we come from the stars. And if anybody can correct me out there, that would be awesome, because I'd really like to learn more about this. But it doesn't matter what the creation story is. What matters is who was created in it. If your people, let's just use the Creeks, for example. Your creation story is a Creek creation story. Is it just the Creeks that were created by this creation story, or is it the entire world that is created by this creation story? And if it's the entire world, then that would mean that everybody, including the Europeans, including the Spanish, including the Italians, the Irish, everybody's, because we come from the same heritage, the same creation story.
That's an interesting thought. I'd never thought about it. Well, you brought up the topic of being Creek. Does your tribe and culture, the Mvskoke people, influence your work, and how does it show up in what you do?
Well, as I mentioned before, I'm really interested into the creation story, and I recently, about a year ago, I did a series of Creek Church camp houses around the churches. But lately, I've been taking more of an abstract approach of what it means to be human, basically, and getting rid of social structures such as race, gender identity, or political view. This is all stuff that we've created to entertain ourselves that, yes, it matters, but at the same time, it doesn't matter enough to make it a hindrance to where we have to go to war over such.
The work you're going to be submitting here for a possible decision to produce it here, and Omogi, tell me about that.
So, a friend of mine, Eli Grayson, and my sister Alexander, they were the ones that told me about this this mural. Oh, my sister April, she also told me about this, and I think like 4 other friends all tagged me in this post, and so it got me really curious about what was going on. So I looked it up, and it's for their Food for Thought show that happens in June, but they're going to select the candidate tonight to. That way the candidate can get ready and start doing the mural so it can be ready by the time that this Food for Thought show happens. I was really looking for a connection with the town and my my statement for my art. My statement is collectiveness of humanity. And what I found out about the town is how its diversity has really made this town. You know, we had the tribal headquarters here, and they hosted one of the first ever black radios here in town. Before the Jim Crow laws, pretty much everybody got along as an equal around these parts. And I really took that to heart because that shows humanity, that shows how special we really are. We don't see each other as red, yellow, black, and white. We just saw each other as human beings. It didn't matter if where you came from as long as you were doing what you were supposed to do at the time. And so that's what really inspired me to create the mural that the concept of what I'll be showing tonight.
What do you want to do with your art? I presume there's a lot of self-satisfaction. First of all, you've got this thing that's got to get out. Yeah. But do you have any plans, any directions, any goals that you'd like to achieve?
My only goal that I ever kind of wish would happen is that we start seeing each other as human beings first. And that's sort of where John Trudell left off. You know, one of his famous quotes were, I'm a human being first and then I'm indigenous second. And I want the rest of the world to realize that, you know. And another thing that I would sort of like to get out there is learning how to forgive and learning to move on. You know, we as indigenous people, we've had a hard life, and a lot of really bad things have happened to us. And it's not easy to forgive. It never is, because you're letting go of something that has really tragic happen. You're letting it go, and you're willing to move on from that point. So if you can do that, then I believe that we can progress as a human race together with our brothers and sisters that come from other places. Yeah, that's it.
Now, you are a recent graduate of the Institute of American Indian Art in Santa Fe. So, you know, is there a degree involved or something like that? And how did this school help you along in your own personal direction? And the reason I ask is I actually have kinfolk who've been through, and some friends, and they were encouraged to go their own ways. And we're seeing many of them go to a traditional style, you know, and things like that, and then others explore some really abstract things, and then other people getting to textiles and fabrics and things like that. So what was it like going to school there?
I freaking loved it. I never really had the intention of doing textile art or any kind of traditional art form. It's funny is what's traditional today or what was traditional yesterday is contemporary 2 years before that, you know. And so today you're looking at like artists who are examining the word traditional, because that's sort of like it's a weird word, because if you do it twice, then it's considered traditional, you know. But you know, even if you look at our stomp grounds, like if somebody from the 1700s or the 1800s came to our stomping ground, they wouldn't recognize the place, because our traditions are different than their traditions. So yeah, you know, it's an abstract word because it means a lot of different things. It's just a point in time of an era. And that's all it is.
Now, you mentioned stomp grounds and traditions. Do they play a part in either your life or your work? I mean, where do they rank and fit into what you do?
Well, you know, when I was younger, I grew up at Montezuma Church. You know, I went every Sunday. My dad was a preacher at a point in time there, and he was a deacon. My mom was a Sunday school director. All of my family lives out in Montezuma. But as I got older, I never really dropped the at the church or the connection that I have with my family, but I sort of took on a role of a different spiritual path. I don't necessarily see myself as a Christian or a traditionalist at stomp dances. I just see myself as a spiritual person, and I move forward in that direction.
Now, the world you live in there is got its highs and lows. Mm-hmm. You find some people who are wildly successful and off on world tours and selling their works internationally, and of course in some of the major museums and collections here. Others face a struggle all their lives. Mm-hmm. I mean, all their lives. They never quite make it. So judging from your experience to date, what would you say to a native young person who is considering dedicating their lives to art and its works?
Some of the best advice that I ever got while I was out there was by a Comanche artist by the name of Nakona Burgess. And I was really fortunate enough to start out strong there, because I knew that whatever it was that I was going to be doing, that I needed to do it good. So I practiced every single night, every single day, even when I didn't feel like doing it. And he recognized that, and he sort of brought me underneath his wing and brought me to his studio. And we were sitting there talking about life and politics and all sorts of stuff. And then we started talking about artwork. And he was saying, you know, there's days that you are not going to want to step in that studio. In fact, like, you're going to destroy a painting because you're going to hate it so much. But work ethics beats inspiration any single day. And those artists that have made it, they understand that. You know, you cannot spend a single day wasting your time watching Netflix or on the computer, on Facebook, or any of that stuff, you know. There will come a time when you will have to start networking, but in your first younger years, you just got to put in the grind and really hone in on your skills and practice and practice and practice some more. Don't ever give up, you know. If you think that you're not a good drawer now, wait till tomorrow, because it's going to be amazing, you know. You don't start out as good as T.C. Cannon or Andy Warhol or Basquiat or any of these good artists, you know. Nobody knew who they were whenever they first started out. Well, except for maybe Basquiat, because he was hanging out Andy Warhol. But, like, you know, that's like a few far and in between type of shot that you get. So you just got to really, really work hard and be a good person. You know, don't ever get ahead of yourself. Don't let your name have a reputation of where everybody knows that you think more of yourself than who you truly are. You know, you be humble, respect your elders, respect everybody that you come in contact with, because you never know. One of the most influential persons in my life that's helped out my art career, Talin Agayo, I met her at a fashion show that I was helping out with a friend of mine in this bar, and I never thought in a million years that I would see these people again. And then about 2 years later, she hits me up and tells me that she's starting a new market, the indigenous fine art market, and she wants to use me as her featured artist, And you never know. So take every single opportunity that you can. Always say yes. And work ethics beats inspiration.
Okay, that was George Alexander II. He was a recent graduate from the Institute of American Indian Art. Now, that interview was actually recorded earlier this spring during the graduate season, but we finally found a right place to share it where it could stand out and listen to what Mr. Alexander had to say. Very talented young man who's got, I think, a bright future ahead of him. In our second portion, we'll be we are joined by our media coordinator, Jessica McBride. Thank you for coming in today.
Oh, no problem, Gary.
We're going to be talking about the recent HUD of the housing program and some of the problems that they picked up there. So we'll be taking our time with that and kind of going over some of the findings there and a quick little discussion there. But before we do that, we're going to take a short pause for the cause, and we'll be right back with today's Mvskoke Radio right here on 1240 The Brew, so please stay with us.
One Fire Casino in Okmulgee offers Ladies' Day every Monday with $5 match play, VIP days for seniors on Tuesdays, time match plays on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and several other great drawings and prizes throughout the weekend. Don't forget to take advantage of spinning the wheel on Sundays to win up to $5,000 cash. Be sure to check out the daily meal specials at Council Oak Cafe. There are exciting monthly giveaways with extravagant prizes. Come and play at One Fire Casino, where it really is okay to play with fire.
Hear that? That's the sound of hope being killed by meth. Methamphetamine use is causing huge problems in our community. Hear that? That's the sound of something you can do about it. Events like rodeo, res ball, and family time can help keep kids away from meth.
Talk to your kids. Keep our culture alive. A message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Learn more at ncai.org.
Okay, we're back here on Mvskoke Radio, produced by Mvskoke Media here. Now, joining us today, as I said, is Jessica McBride. Thank you for making time for us to come down today. We appreciate it. In recent weeks, we've seen the HUD audit that was released looking at the housing program. Now, they were here last year and earlier this spring and made their presence known over in that department. Of course, all kinds of rumors began flying around about, the FBI is next and people are going to be taken out in handcuffs and things like that, but that was not the case. But they did take some time in digging into some of the problems I think that a lot of Mvskoke people have spoken about for years. Things that preceded, of course, the previous administration, that the way things got done over there or didn't get done. And a lot of that came to a head during the administration of our former principal chief, George Tiger. And that's the period that this HUD audit examines. Now, Jessica, you spent a lot of time working on this story, and I applaud you and Sterling for carrying a lot of water on these kinds of stories. I think it's actually making the reputation for Mvskoke Media and showing what we can do when we're allowed to. But we want to go over this again, just for folks who have not been privy to it or didn't want to hear it or didn't want to pay any attention to it. But first of all, the housing program is not falling apart, but there were some mistakes in policies and the way things got done and some of the choices that were being made. So why don't we just start there and let you explain some of the high points that were shared in that audit that that's been released?
So we learned that the auditors, now these are auditors, they're federal auditors from the Office of the Inspector General. The HUD office obviously has the regulations and stuff over our housing program, and we're supposed to adopt a policy and abide by the guidelines and things of that nature. HUD does not actually perform audits, they perform reviews. So they called in the Office of the Inspector General. They're the ones that review these federal programs, and they review other federal programs as well, like the VA, things of that nature. So whenever you hear the Office of the Inspector General, that's who's conducting these audits. They reviewed several files, not all of them, but the files that they reviewed were from 2013 to 2015. They were various files. They reviewed a lot of identity of interest participant files. These are individuals that would have taken part in the housing program that may have been related to someone who worked for the tribe, just conflict of people that could be conflict of interest, just to see how they went about, participating in the program and things like that.
Now, most tribes in the country will end up with a situation where there are relatives working in the tribal government, people who are related. But the situation that we're talking about here goes above and beyond that. Well, my cousin works in the next office kind of thing. It was managerial and supervisory kind of things, contractual sorts of regular being violated. So it wasn't just, oh, well, my cousin over there, kind of thing, right?
Right, and there's nothing in HUD guidelines that says that these parties can't get out. So, if your cousin works for the housing department, there's nothing that says that you can't get a house. All it says is that precautions have to be taken to make sure that the policy and the procedures and everything is followed. One of the things that did come up in the audit is there was a manager that oversaw her brother's file. Now, the auditors called that into question on whether any wrongdoings could have happened with her overseeing her brother's file. Did anything happen? I think they called into question some of the things that were in that file, but what the guidelines kind of say is that these individuals can get a house. You just have to have somebody else review the file, someone else oversee the file, and in some cases even HUD needs to have approval. That's what we learned through reading the HUD regulations back in November when we were exploring the use of waivers, is that in some instances HUD has to actually review the file and say, yes, this is okay, instead of the tribe making that decision.
Now, you said the word waivers there, which is going to figure prominently, and I guess we want to come back to that at some point and look at that a little closer.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. What other things that they kind of reviewed were contracts that the nation made, whether it was repairing homes or building homes. They analyzed 34 of 70 contracts. They also reviewed some lease files. Now, it's clarify whether these are lease to own homes, if these are leases in the apartments that the nation does own in various places within the jurisdiction. We didn't get a chance to really ask those questions of the feds. So, when they said they reviewed lease files, that's what we published. There weren't anything that I could tell that had to do specifically with the apartments that we lease. So I'm figuring that in these instances, these would be like the lease to own home purchases and things like that by the Department of Housing.
Okay. And what else was there?
Well, they found, I believe it was 9 items of interest. And what you have to understand from the audit, too, is that it's kind of a back and forth. I used to work in the mortgage industry, and so I understand a little bit, and I've had to work with HUD before. These are items that they call into question just by reviewing the files and kind of conducting some interviews. So there might be information that the nation can go back with and say, well, you're not exactly seeing the whole picture here. Let me enlighten you, and kind of negotiate that, so to speak, with the feds. So the items that we're going to talk about are currently under negotiation. OIG has recommended that the nation pay back a little bit under $220,000. Whether you see that as a large amount or a smaller amount, that's up to the interpreter. But in our review of the audit, there's about 9 things that they call into question. The first one we're going to talk about is a lease to a low-income family. And I think I should quote this specifically in the summary of the audit. And this is what the report says, word for word. These conditions occurred because the nation's staff did not follow its or HUD's requirements. In addition, the nation's payments and rents policy did not comply with federal regulation. So IG is requesting that we pay back $220,000 of questionable used funds, and they're also requiring us to update policy and procedure to comply with federal regulations. One of the findings was to, like I said, a non-low-income family. And you can go in and read about this specific scenario. The HUD audit is available online. If you go to MvskokeMedia.com, you'll see the story and you'll be able to link to follow the audit. You can Google HUD OIG, and it's HUDOIG.com, and then you can go and view that audit too.
To prevent anyone from thinking, oh, well, it was just a lease to a non-income family, the figure that was cited in the report was a home purchase for $150,000 plus dollars. So that's not a ramshackle little shack somewhere. We're talking a very nice home and I don't know what kind of neighborhood or anything, but $150K is a lot of money.
It is a lot of money, and it doesn't exactly say where this home is. Homes in the southern part of the jurisdiction in more rural areas are going to be cheaper than in Tulsa. So if this home was purchased, in Tulsa, they have guidelines and stuff that they have to follow for how much they can spend on homes, and they have to comply with the federal regulations. Now, they did purchase this home. In this specific instance, the home cost was over $150,000, and the situation is interesting. So the house was purchased for a low-income participant in 2010, and then in 2014 there was a waiver signed so that the individual's nephew could move into the home, and the nephew did not qualify by low-income guidelines but continued the payments and stuff just as they were a low-income program.
Now, to clarify, it also says that the participants there exceeded the guidelines. In other words, they made more money than would have been allowed,
right,
according to regulations.
And HUD has policy and procedure on non-low-income families. So all it's saying, a lot of times with this, HUD does have to approve these. And I don't know for certain, but I would think that this would be an instance where HUD would say, we want to approve this because it is a non-low-income family. Our housing, the MCN Housing program is set to help low-income families with safe and affordable housing. And to have a participant that is non-low income, I'm sure that it happens, and I'm sure there's instances where we would want to help that individual, but the program is primarily for low income families.
It seems like in situations like that there might have been some sort of negotiated limits, perhaps, on how much assistance you could provide to someone who didn't qualify.
Further down in the audit, it talks about low-income payments. So it says that a non-low-income participant, and this is a completely different scenario in the audit, a non-low-income participant was paying the maximum rent of $350. So how HUD works is they have specific calculations based on your income to calculate your rent payment. So the more money you make, the higher your rent payment. The less money you make, the lower your rent payment. And I don't have those calculations in front of me, but if you're curious, you can go to HUD's website and kind of look at that. You can also look at the Creek Nation policy to kind of go over what exactly those rent payments look like. But in that scenario, HUD was saying that the calculations were not correct. Now, there was a couple of things that came up in our interviews that we did, and we interviewed former Principal Chief George Tiger as well as current Principal Chief James Floyd kind of about the audit. One of the things that Tiger had said was that these policies have been in place for a number of years. I believe the quote was over 20 years. And so this has never been called into question before. We just always charged the top limit of $350 in rent. So it'll be interesting to see what our policy and procedure looks like after this and what is negotiated out in this occurrence. Like I said before, each one of these occurrences is a different housing file, it looks like. So that kind of what the nation will do is we'll go back to HUD and we'll say, yeah, we noticed that, but this. And then HUD will come back and say, yeah, but provide this. And so we'll kind of negotiate that out. And so the $220,000 may not be a bottom line figure. It may be zero. It may be $10,000. I don't see any way it would necessarily be more than $220,000. But then again, I don't work for HUD. So that is also part of the process. HUD has 120 days to respond to the audit and respond to our negotiations, which you can also review in the audit as well. So sometime before November, there should be a response from HUD to the nation with kind of a bottom dollar amount of what we owe and what they're going to require us to do. And so hopefully we'll be able to see that and hear that so we can get a final tally.
When we looked at the dates of the audit, which was
2013 to 2015 was what was reviewed.
A couple of years ago, and I'm looking at Chief Tiger's response. They said, "Well, we've been doing this for a while," kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That well may be, but HUD looked at the years that he was captain of the ship, and you can't deny that they said, well, no, this was not correct. And that was during his administration. Mm-hmm. And
but I think it's also important to note, too, that though those were the years that were reviewed, we did a little bit of research online in previous OIG audits on tribes, and we weren't able to find like a OIG audit on Creek Nation ever before. So we don't know that the tribe has ever been audited by HUD in the Office of the Inspector General. There was a couple of other tribes that we found that had been audited, and their findings were fairly similar to ours.
It might be interesting someday to find out what was the trigger there that brought HUD's interest in looking at those specific years.
I think a lot of times they base it on several instances, and I don't know them to be for sure. I don't think they publish anything because, you don't necessarily want to know when what's going to trigger the feds to come in to audit you. And it may just be every once in a while they decide to audit you, or it could be something that someone saw that was kind of interesting in nature, and so they wanted to take a bigger look into it.
Another thought came to my head during your response is, there's always possibilities of whistleblowers too.
Yes, and there is whistleblower information on HUD's website, and so that could be a very real possibility of whistleblowers triggering this.
Right. Okay, now there are other things related to low-income families. One of them was improper rent being charged.
And we kind of discussed that. Now, it talks about our response back was that we shouldn't have to pay the estimated $13,878 owed for not charging this rent. So because this will be paid out of non-federal funds. Now, this opens a can of worms in trying to understand the difference between funds and non-federal funds and how everything works. So they will negotiate this with HUD. OIG maintains in the audit that the nation used program funds to purchase and repair the home, and so it is subject to federal regulations and guidelines. One of the other things that came up, and I really wanted to hit on this because we are hearing about these things that are going out. So citizens may be receiving letters in the mail from HUD that talk about their rent increasing, decreasing. They do have to recertify. Some of the program participants have to recertify every year. What that means is the nation has to verify their income, has to verify who lives in the home, and things of that nature every year. And dependent upon the program, dependent upon what is negotiated in your original contract, your rent could go up or it could go down. It varies depending on, do you have your grandmother living in the home with you? Do you have to take care of her? Maybe you got a new job and you're making more money. Your rent could go up. Your rent could go down. Maybe you lost your job. So we talked to Chief Floyd and former Principal Chief George Tiger kind of about this. Chief Floyd said that this would affect approximately 60 participants, and that the first participant that they had that came in and recertified, their rent actually went down. George Tiger said that he has been receiving calls about this, and he thought it would affect a little bit over 100 people, and he was unsure about people being able to afford an increase, because that's a big deal. If you go from paying $200 in rent to $500 in rent, can you truly afford that? One of the things that we talked to Chief Floyd about was the possibility they're going to try and negotiate with HUD and see if they can settle this in steps so that it's not an immediate hit. That maybe it's, okay, we've recertified you and you're going to have to pay $500 in rent. You currently pay $300, so we're going to step it up in stages. So you're going to go from $300 to $350, and then in the next 6 months you're going to pay $400, and kind of use it in step increases. That way it's not an immediate effect on the family.
Now, Mr. Bucktrot discussed a lot of this material when he was in here a couple of months ago, and talked about the letters going out and saying that this was not an effort to throw anybody out of the homes or evict them and this kind of stuff. So this audit kind of puts a spotlight on that, right? Okay, let's take another topic here. Now, in all of this examination, there's a question about documentation. Were the records not there? What did you find?
In one of the items, it does say that they had trouble finding the documentation. Actually, in a couple of items, it does. In one of them specifically, Creek Nation has said that the document exists. The auditors couldn't find it, but they know it exists because in previous reviews by HUD, that file that was reviewed was called out, and that document was in the file. So there's a chance the documents could be lost. During audits, it's kind of a hectic time, I assume, and so you probably have files everywhere, and so it's probably just misfiled, is what the nation is saying. So the nation is going to look for that document and provide that. Now, in some of the other items, it kind of calls and says that documents weren't in order or policy and procedure wasn't necessarily followed. And some of the documents, that were missing, contracts was the biggest one. And they're saying that there wasn't documentation in the files that supported 4 of these contracts to support that they were fair and reasonable. What's interesting is, and this is explained better in the audit than it is in my story, I kind of just give a summary of it. But for example, when you get a contractor to come in, most of the time they give you a bid. So if I bid on a repair, then it's going to cost X amount. Well, at the end, maybe there was some increases, maybe there were some decreases, weather, time to try and do the project, things like that. Then you get the final amount. So you get an estimate and then you get the final amount. Well, the final amounts for 4 of the contracts reviewed were 33 to 79% greater than what they had estimated. And HUD says that's not necessarily a problem. You just have to document it. And so what the audit found was that the proper documentation wasn't in the file, and that's why we're being asked to provide some of that money back, because we can't prove that it was a fair and reasonable amount.
There is an incredible potential for abuse right there. Right? Saying, well, guess what? It's going to cost you $80,000 more to fix this house or build one or whatever. Just take my word for it is not good enough. So this is kind of what we're talking about then.
Right, and like HUD says in the audit, it's not necessarily that this is wrong. It's just you have to have the proper documentation. They want to show that, hey, there were some problems and so it costs a little bit more money, or the weather hampered things and so we had to have these people on contract for a longer amount of time, which made the price go up. Things of that nature. Again, it was 4 contracts that were reviewed. They didn't review all of the contracts, and so this is just what HUD found in the files that it reviewed.
Now let's go back to the subject of waivers here. Now this one was one that really caused some turmoil. It reached into the National Council there and involved a member there. Somebody got, in essence, a free pass to get over everyone else in line, and there was some question about income guidelines and then what happened to the structure afterwards. So a lot of questions were raised there. And HUD was actually questioning, first of all, the use of waivers itself.
And one of the things, and I don't that individuals quite understand this. HUD regulations are available online, so if you're really, really curious and you want to dig and be like me and print out the 200 pages worth of stuff and look through it and see what you can do, what you can't do, I mean, all that stuff is available online. What HUD said in our initial waiver story back in November was not that waivers were illegal. And let's clarify that. They did not say that waivers were necessarily a problem. You just have to have policy and procedure on how to handle them. Now, in last November when we covered that story, we didn't find anything referencing policy and procedure in the Creek Nation's policy and procedures. So that's where we kind of paired up the Creek Nation policy and procedure to HUD regulations and HUD guidelines. HUD does reference waivers, for example, for non-low income families, because things are going to come up like that. For conflict of interest party, for example, if you are a employee or things like that, like certain things have to be done in order for you to get a home, and HUD has to issue that waiver. Non-low income family, if you make more than whatever the stipulation is, sometimes you have to have a waiver. Sometimes that's from HUD, sometimes that's from Creek Nation. So that's what we were trying to figure out last November was, are our waivers valid? HUD says that we have to have policy and procedure in place to have these waivers, or HUD has to do it, and we couldn't find anything referencing that.
Neither could the National Council, is that correct?
Right, and they from the statement from last November, they said that they were unaware that waivers were happening. Now, in a recent interview with former Principal Chief George Tiger, he did say that this, of course, council wouldn't necessarily know about it because this was an executive function and not a legislative function. So, because it wasn't, you don't have to go through council to get legislation passed to get a house, then, it would be primarily an executive function, and so that's why council wouldn't be aware of it.
Now, also, didn't he say that, used the phrase self-governance tribe that takes care of its own people and makes decisions accordingly? Now, that, to me, just kind of sitting here cold looking at it saying, well, wait a minute, there are federal guidelines involving this sort of thing, and you're saying, no, we don't have to pay any attention to them. We do what we darn well please with it.
I think what he's kind of saying in that statement is that HUD does give us funds for the use of the Creek people, and we adopt a policy, we adopt a procedure for how we're going to use those funds within the HUD. Now, we do have to do it within HUD regulations and HUD guidelines. So if we want, like, one of the things that is in policy and procedure, and you can request this from the housing department, is the preference policy. There is a preference policy that I reviewed last November that dictates who gets priority on the house list. Some of it is by blood quantum. Some of it is by the number of people that will be serviced by this one home. So if you are a single individual and you're unmarried, you don't have any kids, then you're lower on the priority list than an individual that would have lots of kids or lots of family members that would be living in the home.
So I guess the bottom line on that particular subject, then HUD said what?
As far as the self-governance,
The waiver kind of thing.
it's up in the air.
Okay.
Waivers are legal as far as HUD's concerned.
But
You have to have a policy and procedure in place for it. So let's get down to the bottom line, and let's use me and you as an example. I give you money and I say, Gary, I want you to spend this money wisely. I want you to provide it for the use of your family that is best use. But I want you to help someone who is in need. I want you to develop policies and procedures to use that money so that you can use it fairly and justify it.
Does that mean I can't go to Disneyland?
That means you can't go to Disneyland on those funds. So that's what HUD is kind of telling us.
Yeah, and they were saying, well, we don't see this, so it's still a question that
Right.
there actually may not be legal.
Right.
Now, in the last few minutes here, you spent a lot of time working on this story, and as a reporter, I mean, was this really a tough one as you kept seeing all these things come to light?
It kind of is tough, and my struggle is how do you relay this information to citizens? So I have, a 50-page report in front of me, and there's a whole lot of legal jargon. We talk about waivers, we talk about income guidelines and things of that nature. It's a lot of reading, and how, without telling a citizen, and I've said it on this show, go and read the audit for yourself, but some people don't have time, or some people don't quite understand what exactly is going on. So my problem in writing this story was, how do I tell people what is going on without just quoting laws and doing things like that? How do I make it understandable, palatable to the common everyday person that has no idea what HUD or OIG or income or anything like that is?
Right, because you look at some of that stuff and it's as clear as mud. Right now, all of this material is published in the August 1st edition of Mvskoke Nation News. Right up top, it's a front page story looking at the material that's involved there. So we'll suggest to folks, if you really have questions, of course you can find it online, but our story there takes all of this point by point and deals with it.
Yeah, and it's really a summary. It is a long story, but the HUD audit is really, really long as well. So if you just want a summary, we've kind of summarized the story here. Tried to make it in as small a language as possible. If you are interested, the HUD audit itself is available online, and you should be able to go on, just Google HUD OIG, and their website will pop up. Or you can go to MvskokeMedia.com, and that link is in my story. I believe the link is also in the newspaper story as well, so you can type it in to your computer, or if you've got a grandson or something that's pretty good with computers and can show you, then have them do that.
And the the interviews with Chief Lloyd and Chief Tiger are still there in the archives?
Right, they're still there in the archives as well. Native News Today actually published those two interviews specifically together, and they also did kind of a timeline review from the time last November, October, when the waivers were brought into question, all the way up until now, so you can kind of update and refresh your memory on the story.
Okay. Well, we hope that our listeners will take this to heart, and if you do have questions about this really complicated story, that you do take the time to read the article, follow up. If you've got questions to be raised, please do. I mean, that's what we're here for, is to present this information. And, if you need to go to the chief office or wherever, then I presume that you'd probably go ahead and do that. I think Chief Lloyd would talk to you.
Hey, from what I understand, they're saying, hey, if you have questions, come in and talk to the acting secretary, Al McBride, or
Right.
Chief Lloyd, or anything like that.
Right, and decide for yourself, work from the information that you've got there. Okay, in the last few minutes we have here, we're going to do some community announcements with assistance from the capable Ms. McBride here. First of all, the Healthy Kids, Healthy Families, the Incredible Years Parent Training System is being unveiled. You can learn how to promote positive behavior with your children and improve outcomes. There'll be 8 sessions designed for children ages 2 to 8 to strengthen parenting skills. So if you're interested in project launch, get a hold of Dayan Dooley at 918-224-9307. That location's in Tulsa and Sepulveda.
So the splash pad that was newly opened, I believe in May, is closed until further notice so that they can remediate a water leak and draining issues. We haven't heard any updates on when it'll be back open yet. So we recommend, if you have questions or concerns, contact the Tourism and Recreation Office. That phone number is 918-732-7992, and we'll let you know as soon as we hear when it's open.
Right, we found out that was an incredibly popular recreational opportunity for the little ones there. They were squealing and playing around in it. So we're hoping that those problems get resolved fairly quickly, because we are dealing with the heat of August hitting us here. So hopefully they'll get it fixed. If you have medical issues that you need to deal with, the Mvskoke Creek Nation Community Clinic could possibly be of a lot of assistance there. The clinic offers comprehensive family care, primary medical care, comprehensive preventive health screenings, wellness checks, same-day appointments are available, and new patients are welcome to establish primary care. That's in the Baker Building at 1201 South Belmont, Suite 207 here in Okmulgee. Their office hours run Monday through Friday in the mornings from 8 to 12, and then from 1 to 5 in the afternoons. Give them a call at 918-756-5471.
The 3rd annual Scholarship Foundation Program Golf Tournament is going to be Friday, September 2nd. It's $400 per team for a 4-person scramble. Now, the Scholarship Foundation is different from our higher education department and the grants that you receive. These are donated funds by citizens and organizations for specified scholarships. So for more information on the golf tournament, which will be at Fountainhead Creek Golf Course in Chicago on September 2nd, or on the Scholarship Foundation in general, if you would like to donate or get a scholarship, phone number is 918-732-7754.
Are you a golfie?
I'm not. I like watching golf, but I I do watch golf on TV. Sunday afternoon nap, you put golf on TV and fall right to sleep.
Okay, he's driving now for the pin. It's 16 yards, dude, and brakes to the left. Now watch.
Hey, you might be a good golf reporter. You have the whispering voice
Yes.
that they have during golf reporting to be very quiet.
Yeah, very quiet. Well, we better turn it up here. We have some emergency tips to stay cool during this August weather, during summer heat. The best defense is prevention, and here's some ideas. 1, drink more fluids and make them non-alcoholic, please. It isn't going to do you much good, regardless of your activity level, and don't wait until you're thirsty to drink. Now, if your doctor limits the amount of fluid you drink or has you on water pills, ask him how much you should drink while the weather is hot.
Also, Gary mentioned to avoid alcohol, also avoid large amounts of sugar. So your soft drinks and even some of your Gatorades, you might want to check the sugar content on that before you drink that in order to help stay cool.
And also avoid cold drinks, right?
Oh, yes, very, very cold drinks because they can cause stomach cramps.
Not to mention brain freeze and throat freeze and things like that. Stay indoors if possible, and if You can't stay in an air-conditioned place. If your home does not have air conditioning, go to the shopping mall or a public library. Even a few hours spent in air conditioning can help out and make a real difference.
And to kind of wrap us up, because I know we're kind of short on time, make sure you check on your young children, your elderly. Call and check on them in this heat, because you want to make sure that they're all right and that they're staying cool as well.
Okay. Well, that'll do it for us today here on Mvskoke Radio. We want to say Mado Mabo Hedgitscut. Please join us next week. We're going to have Mr. Watko Long come in and talk about some Creek hymns. So please join us next week. Gary Fife saying thank you very much.
Jessica McBride.
Mado. You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Mado.